Hello, everyone. If you've tuned in for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Encounters presentation, From the Sea to the Stars, Women Engineering for Ocean and Space Exploration, you're in the right place. Coming up, we'll hear from WHOI Chief Scientist for the National Deep Submergence Facility, Anna Michelle, NASA astronaut and former WHOI engineer Laurel O'Hara, WHOI software engineer Gwyneth Packard, and WHOI mechanical engineer Caitlin Tradd. Hi, everyone. In just a few minutes, we'll get started with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Encounters presentation, From the Sea to the Stars, Women Engineering for Ocean and Space Exploration. We've still got a lot of people joining us, so thank you for your patience.
The ocean covers 70% of the globe. It gives us oxygen and food and millions of jobs. It brings joy and shapes our climate and weather. The ocean is life, and it belongs to everyone. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is the world's independent leader in ocean discovery, exploration, and education, working to understand and sustain one of humanity's most precious common resources. Join us today for our ocean, our planet, and our future.
Welcome to a special presentation of Ocean Encounters, a virtual series from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, or WHOI as we like to call it for short. Tonight's event is entitled From the Sea to the Stars, Women Engineering for Ocean and Space Exploration. WHOI's Ocean Encounters online events are made possible in part by the Avatar Alliance Foundation and Dalio Philanthropies. And tonight's event is co-sponsored by the WHOI Women's Committee. Thank you. My name is Carol Ann Clayson, and I'm a senior scientist in the Department of Physical Oceanography, as well as the Associate Director for Research Strategies at WHOI. I'll be your host for tonight's event. Before we hear from our panelists, I'd like to take a minute and share some tips on how you can optimize your experience with us on Zoom. Throughout the evening, our speakers will be taking questions from all of you. If you'd like to participate in this live Q&A, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen and type your question in the window that appears. You might be more familiar with the chat function in Zoom, but please ask your questions using the Q&A function instead. We often get hundreds of questions, so I apologize if we don't get to yours while we're live. You can ask questions at any time starting now. I also want to let you know that we are recording this event. That recording will be made available on the whoi.edu website. We had more than 3,800 people pre-register to join us tonight, so you're in good company. Thank you and welcome to everyone. So tonight we're going to hear from 4 women engineers who explore extreme places in the ocean and outer space. These are hostile environments that demand special tools and special people who routinely test their own limits and push the boundaries of knowledge deeper into the unknown. First, I'd like to go around the virtual table and have each of our panelists introduce herself. Anna, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Carol Ann. Hi, my name is Anna Michelle, and I'm an associate scientist in the Department of Applied Ocean Physics and Engineering here at WHOI. In my lab, we develop new instruments for ocean sensing. We focus a lot on developing instruments that can measure methane and carbon dioxide in the ocean. Both of these are greenhouse gases. We've also recently started developing new ways to measure microplastics in water. Our sensors have been deployed in a range of locations from the deep sea to the Arctic. I also serve as the chief scientist for the National Deep Submergence Facility. This facility operates the underwater vehicles Sentry, Jason, and Alvin for the oceanographic community across our country. I serve as the liaison between the scientists who use these vehicles and the groups who operate these vehicles. I'm also very passionate about utilizing outreach to inspire a diverse next generation of ocean scientists and engineers.
Thank you, Anna. Gwyneth, how about you?
My name's Gwyneth Packard, and I'm a marine roboticist. I work as a senior engineer in the Oceanographic Systems Lab here at WHOI, and most of my work is in autonomy and software architecture for untethered autonomous underwater robots. So my focus is on giving systems ways of understanding what to do next, and not only what to do and where to go, but how well they're doing, whether everything is operational and if they have enough energy to get home, and also meeting up with other platforms. So what we call cooperative autonomy. And I work really closely with a lot of different scientists collaborating on ways that these platforms can collect data to inform ocean research. And then another big piece of my work, of course, is doing outreach, both as a Black, white, biracial woman in engineering, but also for the last 2 years as the co-chair for the WHOI Committee Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and also co-chair for the Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium. So doing a lot of work advocating for inclusion in STEM as a way to create an environment where we can make meaningful progress in diverse representation.
Thank you. Caitlin.
Hey everybody, my name is Caitlin Trad and I'm a mechanical engineer in the Advanced Engineering Lab at HUI. I've been a full-time employee as a mechanical engineer for over 10 years, but I started as a summer student fellow back in 2008, in the summer before my senior year of college. I really fell in love with the work at HUI and decided I wanted to come back as a full-time employee after that. While I've been at HUI, I've had the opportunity to work on a bunch of different projects, including the Alvin submersible upgrade. I've gone to sea with Jason. I've designed many instrumentation, sampling equipment, even full autonomous vehicles, and sometimes support equipment like winches and recovery systems for these systems at sea. I've also been able to use these on research cruises worldwide, at least 1 or 2 a year since I've been at HUI. Like Gwyneth and Anna Michelle, I'm always eager to participate in outreach. My sister's an elementary school teacher in Boston, and I love visiting her class whenever I can to talk to young children about science and engineering, how I got to where I am, and why I love doing what I do.
Thank you. And finally, our NASA participant and HUI adjunct oceanographer, Laurel.
Thanks, Carolyn. My name is Laurel O'Hara, and I worked as a mechanical engineer at Woods Hole for 8 years, from 2009 to 2017. I was involved in a major upgrade to the human-occupied research submersible Alvin, where I actually worked really closely with Caitlin, like she said. And I also worked on some of the other deep submergence vehicles at Woods Hole, like Jason and Sentry. I absolutely loved working at HUI, but I had always dreamed of being an astronaut ever since I was a little kid. So every time NASA would put out a call for applications, I would apply. And after 3 times, I got selected in 2017, largely, I think, thanks to the experiences that I got to have at Woods Hole. So now I live in Houston, Texas, where I train for spaceflight and support human spaceflight operations.
Thank you to all of you. And I'd like to get us a little more information about each of you. So I'm starting with a 2-part question for each of you. How do you describe what an engineer does and what drew you to become one? Gwyneth, let's start with you.
Thanks, Caroline. The first thing I think of with engineering is problem solving. And so with problem solving, we're gathering requirements, and there's a lot of logic involved. But we also do a lot of communication and collaboration. And there's the mystery. We don't always know the right answer when we start. Part of what really drew me in the first place was the logic. I love that piece, and my brain lights up with the puzzles and the patterns. And I remember my dad used to, on work trips, bring home logic puzzle books for me as a treat. But I've also come, even as a real introvert, to value and really enjoy the brainstorming sessions involved in looking for new research ideas, communicating designs, and exploring the edges of a problem together. And it's really important to have a lot of diverse voices in those rooms to improve the solutions that we come up with, as well as being the right thing to do.
Thanks. Caitlin, how about you?
So engineers enable us to explore the world around us. They take a question and they try to answer it, which always brings up more questions. And so there's more engineering and it keeps the cycle going. I think engineering was instilled in me from a very young age. My grandfather was an aerospace engineer and actually helped design the 747 airplane. So I grew up hearing stories of 747 nose being shaped the way it was, or the first emergency evacuation of the airplane, and could they do it in the right amount of time for safety. He even taught me about torsional, tensional, and shear failure using pretzel sticks on the beach when I was little. My interest was more in eating the pretzel sticks at the time than learning about the failure modes, but I think it was part of my upbringing from a very young age.
Thanks. Laurel, how about you?
Yeah, so similar to what Gwyneth and Caitlin both said, as engineers, we try to understand how things work and use that knowledge to create something new. As an engineer, I loved the days where I just kind of had a whole day where I could dig into a problem, whether it was designing or analyzing something on the computer or fixing a piece of hardware. At the same time, I also have always felt very passionate about doing work that helps make the world a better place. So in addition to kind of the day-to-day life as an engineer, engineering also really appealed to me as a really hands-on way to contribute, hopefully contribute to solving some of the big problems in the world.
Thanks. Anna, how about you now? Anna, you'll need to unmute.
Sorry. So I think that engineering actually gets lumped together as a single thing a lot of times, but it's actually not. So there's many different types of engineering. We have chemical engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, environmental engineers, and even ocean engineers. In high school, I loved math and science, and the idea of doing engineering really appealed to me. I went to MIT for undergraduate and was surrounded by many students around me that were also pursuing engineering degrees in all different types of engineering.
Thanks. Given that each of you have talked a little bit about different ways in which you got into engineering, when is it that you realized that engineering would be your career path? Anna, let's start with you.
Yeah, so in high school, I was actually chosen to participate in one of Dr. Robert Ballard's JASON project expeditions. Now, our audience probably knows Bob Ballard as the discoverer of the Titanic. Well, he set up a project called the JASON Project, and his goal was to share live ocean exploration with children across the country. The live stream was sent to museums and aquariums, and students could go and watch these live explorations. And for each project, they actually selected some students to join the expedition. And I was in high school, and I got to join a research cruise to the Galapagos Islands. And they were using small, remotely operated vehicles, these ROVs, to explore the seafloor. And I was amazed that this was actually a career path you could take. So I asked, how do you get to do this for a career? And the answer was study engineering. And that really had me hooked. Ballard at the time was a part of the Deep Submergence Lab, and that's actually now the lab that I'm a part of. I just actually got home myself from a month-long cruise that I led, and we did our own live explorations from the seafloor, sharing that to classrooms across the country, that we broadcast also to the web that the public audience could watch. So now I feel like it's my turn to actually share this kind of career path with others.
That's a pretty cool story. Gwyneth, how about you?
I came to this late after earning my undergrad degree in physics and then a master's in physical oceanography, and then spending nearly a decade doing observational work. I spent about 2 years of my life at sea doing hydrographic cruises. But then I realized my real interest was in building the tools to analyze the data, and I went back to school for some computer science, and then pursued that in industry for about 7 years before finding my way back to Hui and starting this job in this lab where I get to design and architect software solutions using my computer science, but to expand the capabilities of platforms doing ocean exploration where I started. So I was in my 30s when I got to engineering.
Interesting. Caitlin, how about you?
I don't think there's one specific moment that sticks out to me that brought me to engineering. I think it was a lot of things during my childhood and then even during my high school and college career. One that does stick out to me is my freshman year of high school, we had to build Rube Goldberg machines, which is basically a machine that uses all 6 simple machines, a screw, a lever, a pulley, etc., to achieve a goal. So you start with one little thing and there's a catalyst and a chain reaction. And for us, that was launching a ping pong ball about 20 feet in front of the table and into a trash can. It kind of turned on my creative brain, and I got to use my dad's tools in the basement, which weren't usually allowed. Drills and saws and things like that, and a candle even, to build this machine. So I think at that point I realized that engineering combined creativity and artistry and math and science, and sort of was a great blend for me in terms of what I was really passionate about.
Great. Laurel, how about you?
So for me, growing up, I always wanted to be a lot of different things. I think in school, I was mostly into art and sports, but I also read a ton of books, and they gave me a lot of ideas for places that I want to go and things that I want to do. In high school, I got really interested in airplanes and also in boats. My family was not really into either one of these things, but for my 16th birthday, my parents, I had the opportunity to start taking flying lessons thanks to my parents. That was super cool because at the time I wasn't even really allowed to drive like anywhere besides school and work, but I got to go fly planes. And so I kind of fell in love in airplanes, and this led me to study aerospace engineering in college. That was on one hand a no-brainer. Like I said, I was crazy about planes, but on the other hand, math had never been one of my favorite subjects. I always felt like I had to work a little harder in that subject than others to get the same grades, but I really loved the material. So I decided to study engineering anyways. And that ended up being the first step in what's been a really exciting career and definitely worth all of the work that it took.
Laurel, I think it's great to hear about your perseverance and the fact that you had to work through things that didn't necessarily come easily to you, quickly. It's good for us to remember that some things are really inherently difficult. And just because it's difficult for you does not mean that you should stop working towards your goals. So is there anything for anyone here that is in your background that you didn't think would come into play in your career, but that it did? Anna, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. I think that we all think about engineering as being this purely math activity, but actually there's a lot of writing involved, which I don't think people realize. I probably spend about 70% of my time sitting at a computer writing things. And so that's something I think that you don't think about when you think about engineering.
Yeah, I think for me, the artistry of engineering is one thing that you don't think of. When you're designing something, there's a lot of shapes and curves, and at least as a mechanical engineer, probably less so for you, Gwyneth, with software. But I was very much into art and clay and different mediums and stuff. And so I think that came into play with my engineering background.
I'd like to second the note on the writing, and especially with software. I'm not the best at it, but documenting for yourself for 6 months from now, when you look back on things, the writing is really important.
Okay, so talking about other areas that have impacted on your engineering capabilities reminds me that we often think of engineering as something that's done by formula, that there's sort of this logical progression that happens from the beginning to the end, like a textbook. We just go from the start to the end. And in reality, though, engineering is highly creative and very absorbing. So Gwyneth, what is it about your job that engages you and makes you want to come to work each day?
Well, like I said, I'm an introvert, but I've got to say I've, in the last few years, really come to value the collaborative nature and collaborating with scientists who are looking for solutions for new ways to collect data, and with other engineers to expand the platform capabilities. And we brainstorm a lot, and it's not linear, and gathering those requirements and thinking of, just the edges of the problem and how solutions might fit together. I love the way that we're always growing our knowledge, that there are always new people to collaborate with, new connections to areas that we're studying and the people who live there, and new ways to look at things.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. Like Gwyneth, I've always kind of considered myself an introvert too, but one thing I've learned over the years is that I'm very team oriented. And I get a lot of joy out of being part of a good team, especially working in operational environments, whether that's a research cruise or on a space flight. And some of my most memorable times are some of the hardest times, like when things are not going right or when we just had a lot of work to do. And as an example, one moment I remember really well is working at sea with ROV Jason. The vehicle was supposed to be down on the seafloor doing science, but instead it was broken on deck. We had stayed up all night trying to fix the problem. We were having a problem with some latches, and we were still working on it like well after breakfast the next day, but we're kind of finally on a path to success. And I remember just pausing for a moment and, looking at the work that I was doing and looking around at my colleagues and we had some music going. We were probably all filthy and covered in oil and probably making fun of each other and thinking, man, like there's nowhere else I'd rather be right now. Like I love doing this work. I love these people. And I think that, and just the success of solving a problem like that and getting a vehicle back working so you can continue doing the job is just a really good feeling. And I think anyone who works in the field probably has similar stories. And my experience at NASA has been the same, like becoming a part of this incredible team and seeing how the team works together and responds when it needs to has been by far one of my favorite parts of my job.
Yeah, I think you hit on a few aspects that I'd like to explore a little further about, what is it about engineering for the ocean and specifically for underwater that is so unique? Things that I've developed, I look at more of the surface of the ocean, and it has its own set of problems when you're trying to design something that sits up, 20 or 30 feet above the surface and is hit constantly by waves, sea spray, and all types of other things that these delicate instruments sometimes don't respond well to. But what other kinds of experiences have you had that makes this ocean underwater engineering so unique?
I can answer that, Carolyn. So engineering for the ocean is extremely difficult. So we have to design things that can operate in a salty, wet, and really high pressure environment. So I work a lot in the deep ocean, and there's actually a lot of logistics involved with even getting our gear and our people to these sites. We use robots in my lab to reach these deep ocean sites, which means we also have to bring along a large team of robotics engineers with us. It's also very hard to get to the places we want to study, so we spend a lot of time out on ships. One personal thing that makes it very difficult is I have to leave my son at home when I travel to these sites. I was just actually at sea. I just got back earlier this week, which meant I missed Thanksgiving at home, but my son's glad that I'm home and we'll be home for Christmas.
I can talk about another technical challenge for the underwater robots is that it's challenging because of the lack of connectivity. The electromagnetic waves are absorbed in the first few centimeters of the ocean. And so we don't have Wi-Fi, GPS, radio waves, cell phone once we get past the surface. Once the vehicles are underwater, we're using a lot of acoustics or optics to try to communicate. So that makes it really challenging. But on a personal challenge, knowing that you're going to be away for holidays, or in one case, very specifically trying to get back for my daughter's birthday. I left in time, but I ended up spending her birthday being evacuated from the Reykjavik airport and then sitting on the ground waiting for them to reopen it and texting her about why I couldn't be there. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah. And I'll reiterate what both Anna Michelle and Gwyneth said. My husband's actually a pilot for the Jason submersible that Laurel has mentioned and that I've gone to sea with. And while we used to have the opportunity to go to sea together occasionally, we now have a 3-year-old. So when we both go to sea, it has to be at different times so that someone is home to watch the kiddo. Just having one of us at sea is always challenging with a little one. There's been times where we passed each other in the airport and just been like, hey, honey, I'm home. Okay, great. Have a nice cruise. I'll see you tomorrow. So yeah, it's definitely challenging to be away from your loved ones for that long.
Okay, well, let's take our first audience question. And I'm going to start with one that sort of builds on what we've been talking about here. So Millie asks, did any of you face gender-specific obstacles en route to getting to your current positions? So we were talking about different kinds of challenges, and some of them you have brought up already, but is there anything specific? I'll just say, my PhD is in aerospace engineering sciences, and there were a few semesters that I was the only woman in the department, in the graduate school, in that department, and out of 120, and that had its own set of obstacles. But I'm sure some of you have some other experiences that you wouldn't mind sharing with us.
I can say that the very first research cruise that I stepped onto, there was me and one other woman. It was for both of us, it was our first cruise. And the first day that we had gotten underway and we're having our briefing on deck, the bosun looked at us and then looked at the chief scientist and said, are all these women going to be on deck? And we were like, this is why we're here. This is so we worked really hard and we did gain his respect, but it was challenging to be viewed that way from the get-go, you know.
I agree with Gwyneth. I had one experience on a ship similar where the captain actually came up to me and said, "It's so impressive that you know how to tie that knot." And that was sort of a backhanded compliment in a way, but I just took it as a challenge to prove him that I was just as capable, if not more capable, than even the deck crew that he had on the ship.
I will say that one of the crew came up about a couple weeks into the cruise. We put into Newfoundland to refuel and everybody went out. And when we were coming back, he put an arm around both of us and said, "I'd rather have you guys at my back than anyone else." And it was very sweet. So they did come around. But
Caroline, I'd just like to add that I think all of us have been in situations where there's very few women in engineering. And I think that's why all of us are really dedicated to trying to work with the next generation and really inspire young women to pursue careers in engineering. I think that's where a lot of this comes from, us being the only woman a lot of times or one of very few women. And so we all feel very passionate about sharing the message that women can be engineers.
It is always,
I think Huey's actually a great example of that. I worked a couple of different places before I ended up at Woods Hole, and like everyone else has said, was often one of the only women there. But then I got to Woods Hole, and I was actually for a while working mostly with female engineers and scientists and technicians. And so that was a pretty cool experience. And so I think that was just, I think, a really good strength and a neat experience at Woods Hole.
Yeah, Laurel, when you were with us at Hui, our women outnumbered men in our lab as mechanics.
I know.
Pretty cool.
And it's those moments you look around and say, this is kind of shocking, actually, but also at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the odds aren't in our favor. I think it's still hovering around 10 to 12% for female representation in engineering, industry-wide. I mean,
still some work to do there. Well, let me ask you another question. So the subtitle tonight references ocean and space exploration. How do each of you think of exploration? Gwyneth, you want to lead us off?
Sure. I think about how little of the planet we've actually observed even once, let alone often enough to understand the processes that vary on seasonal or decadal or longer timescales. And there are features of the ocean that impact so many facets of our lives, from trade to our diet and providing 50 to 70% of our oxygen. But we don't really know yet all of the planet's workings well enough to understand our relationship with the planet.
Yeah, and I think of building on that, I think of exploration as a primary driver to help answer questions and solve problems on Earth through both gaining knowledge and developing new technologies. Also, the stories that come from both the successes and the failures of explorers are really inspiring and also show us the limits of what humans can achieve. Also, very importantly, and one of the things that I think is most exciting about the space program in particular is the rather unique opportunity that exploration provides for international partnership and cooperation between countries that might not otherwise get along. It shows what we can accomplish when countries work together.
Yeah, building on what Laurel said, I think, understanding the world around us and mitigating our effects on that world. So yeah, with partnership and being able to kind of tackle some of the challenges that are facing us in our modern lives.
I'll just add that we always learn new things when we explore, which really teaches us about our own planet. I think it's actually really important for us to explore the ocean so we can be better informed when we have these difficult decisions to make about how we're going to use our ocean and our planet. I actually think that exploration is the most exciting part of my job. So I get to use robots and tools for exploration, and we never know exactly what we're going to see. For those of you that have been to sea with me before, you know that I get really excited when we're diving on a place that no one's ever seen before or that's been minimally explored, because we just really don't know what we're going to get to see. And that's an extremely exciting part of my job.
And you can't protect something if you don't understand it.
That is true. So Laurel, thinking of that, that protection and understanding and exploration, how did your experience designing underwater vehicles prepare you for your life now as an astronaut? And what did NASA value about the experience you brought?
That's a good question. And I think there's actually a lot of overlap in these experiences, especially from an operational standpoint. The skills and abilities are very similar. Like, for example, when you're out on a research cruise or on a spacecraft, you have to be able to keep your equipment running and your team healthy and functional, even when you're in a very remote place with very limited resources. You have to be able to be very comfortable taking things apart and fixing them. And but probably most importantly, being able to get along with anyone in a small group dynamic. I got my first real operational experience at Woods Hole, and I'm continuing to do that at NASA. And what I'm finding is that working in ops is pretty similar regardless of the work that you're doing. It's a lot of, besides all the really exciting, the actual, excitement and the work that you're doing, it's a lot of hurry up and wait and plans changing and something's breaking or bad weather rolls in or COVID arrives, whatever it is, the team has to adjust in real time and keep on pressing towards a goal. And then conversely, sometimes the days are really monotonous, and finding ways to stay engaged and to keep doing your best every day can be a different kind of challenge. So overall, I think the skills are the same. Learning how to be resourceful and be patient and adaptable and work well with others.
Yeah, that's a theme that many of you have talked about, that, part of it is the team experience, working with other people, being creative and being adaptable. And since engineering is really such a creative endeavor, I think it's really important to have people looking at problems from many different perspectives. We've talked a little bit about, the experiences we've had as women in engineering. So along those lines, and getting that lots of looks and experiences bringing to a problem, what are ways that we can encourage diversity within engineering?
I'll take that, Carol Ann. First, I think one of the most important things that we can start with is inclusion and fostering a sense of belonging. And we can do that in several ways. Everyone needs mentors. And so making sure that people from traditionally excluded groups have access to mentoring. Everyone needs to be heard, and that means in team meetings, in seminars, creating a space that really encourages people to ask probing questions or pitch ideas that might not take off right away, and then making it safe to fail. And a lot of our development is design, test, evaluate, and adapt. And what that can really feel like is try, test, fail, and then adapt, and try, test, fail. And there are whole schools of thought about failing faster, and teams need to support each other so that team members can try things that might not work the first time and have what might feel like failure, but is actually the building block for the next step, and to have the team support to do that in a way that that the team gains from the experience, and mitigating risks so that it's safe for people to try and fail.
I think that kind of goes along with what we were talking too about. Laurel had mentioned, some things were difficult for her to start off with, and that this is, a lot of what we're doing is a very difficult endeavor, and we have to have that space for people to, we try out new ideas, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and we have to be able to make it safe for people to do that and be able to contribute to the enterprise.
Yeah, because that's a luxury that's not traditionally afforded to people from historically excluded populations. So it's a really important piece of the diversity puzzle.
Well, talking about the engineering enterprise, we know, and some of you have also talked about this, we really are looking at some of the biggest questions facing society today. And I think a lot of people would like to know how they can be involved in contributing to solutions to some of those problems that we're experiencing. So I guess I have a question for all of you. Are there ways to be involved that don't require you to have a degree in engineering?
Yeah, I can answer this. There are lots of ways to be involved, in short. You can look at any WHOI engineering project or any engineering project, and you'll find engineers working with scientists, working with technicians, skilled tradespeople like machinists, carpenters, welders. But even more broadly, it takes all sorts of specialties that you might not even think of, like photographers, illustrators, administrative professionals, human resource specialists, accountants. If they work in a small town, that they probably work at WHOI or somewhere like NASA. WHOI employs mariners to operate our research vessels. NASA employs doctors and psychologists. So there really is a place for everyone who wants to contribute to these missions.
That's a really great point. I think that there's so many different ways to participate in the research and the mission or the purpose of the research. And it takes such a variety of specialties to plan and fund the work, to accomplish the work, and then to communicate the data and the relevance of the work to the broader community. And what Laurel's list really emphasizes is that we all have the potential to contribute to these engineering challenges.
And I think having all of those people contribute gains different perspectives as when you look at the problems. And so you've got people coming from different backgrounds with a different approach to the problem. So it's from an accounting perspective or from a social outreach, social media and getting the word out there. And they'll look at it from a different perspective than an engineer or a scientist.
Add one thing to go along with what Laurel said. I just got back from being at sea, and one of the most important people on the ship is actually the cook, because they're making food for everybody and keeping everybody happy and fed. So there's lots of jobs on our research vessels that have nothing to do with engineering, but are just as critically important, actually probably more important, to keeping the ship running and keeping everybody able to do their science and engineering.
Can tell you just came back from a cruise. The food is actually very important when you're out for weeks and months at a time, right? that becomes a highlight of your day.
Pivotal.
Yeah.
Key, absolutely.
So we're going to take a couple more audience questions right now. And we have one from Pia, who's wondering if we ever feel burned out? And if so, how do we deal with that and restore our drive? I'm guessing that we have all had the experience of being burned out and having to find a way to restore our drives. So do any of you want to answer this question?
I'll jump in real quick. Honestly, events like this, and when I get to talk to kids especially, but do some kind of outreach, and talk about what I do, and it reminds me why I love it. It gives me a little refresh, a bit of a reset button on like just sitting and toiling away at the engineering aspect of things. It's like, oh yeah, wait, this is really cool.
Yeah, similar to Caitlin, I think, so like if I'm feeling burned out or just kind of tired, taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of like what we're trying to accomplish, or like the results of the work that we're trying to do, or think like in my job now, what's going on Space Station, and just kind of keeping that bigger picture in mind is helpful. And then also just being able to like mix it up, like have different projects to work on. Maybe you get to travel just at an opportune moment in your just for work, even for work, is all really helpful to me when I'm feeling burned out.
I think one of the hard things about our jobs is that they don't end. Science engineering doesn't end at 5 o'clock. It keeps going. So I think that's an easy way to get burned out, is that you go home and your job really hasn't ended. I think for me, one of the best parts is that I have students. So I have graduate students in my lab, and I usually have undergraduates in the summer in my lab. And sometimes we've had high school students, and being able to work with students, that's really another way to kind of deal with the burnoutness, because they're there to learn, and they're new to all of this. And I think that's another really positive outlet.
And I think just sometimes, in addition to those strategies, unplugging and going back to, I'm fortunate that my office window looks right out over the ocean, but to walk down there and stand there listening and smelling and hearing and looking at the ocean and getting outside can help as well.
in the theme of being burned out. We have a question from Jessica who asks, have any of the robots failed and not returned to the surface? You know, I know we've talked about not knowing all the answers all the time already, but does anyone have an example of how you've dealt with failure of that kind?
Yes, there is a Remus that did not come back.
I think we're all thinking of that.
Yeah. The team moves on. You know, the team. First of all, the team. So that's part of how you move on, right? Coming together and looking at lessons learned, and I mean, it's part of throwing your really expensive electronics into a vast body of salt water. Is sometimes it's not going to come back, but we do everything we can to mitigate the risk and as a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just building on that, like like with Nereus, for example, they launched the vehicle went down, everything was operating normally, and then it just stopped communicating with the ship back to the surface. So it just went completely silent. And then a couple hours later, just a couple pieces of the vehicle floated to the surface. And that's all we've ever been able to recover from Nereus. So that's, you know, kind of traumatic, like you put your baby in the ocean and then all you get back are a couple pieces. But doing a thorough failure analysis, like trying to figure out what happened and getting better, so hopefully it doesn't happen again, are all very important parts of that.
In my lab, we work on instruments, and we put these big pressure housings on robots and we send them down. And the failure point is that they once in a while leak, and we've had those kind of failures where the whole instrument fails. But as somebody said to me once, if you're not losing an instrument or a robot every so often, you're not doing enough. Like, you're not putting robots in the ocean enough. So at some point, I think everybody has some kind of failure in the deep ocean. Again, it's a really difficult environment to work in. So there's always going to be a time where something fails. Unfortunately, it's not very fun. But we can usually try to rebuild things and try again.
So another question comes from Deb, who asks who our mentors were. And I'll just mention one of my mentors was a woman named Joanne Simpson. And I got to know her when I was just starting out, as I was finishing my graduate work and then starting out. And I didn't know at the time, but she had also worked at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution for a while. She was the first woman in the United States to get a PhD in meteorology, really a trailblazer. And just seeing her, succeeding and doing amazing science, and being awarded medals from the World Meteorological Organization and places like that. She was a real mentor to me. I've had others too. So do any of you have a particular mentor that you might want to share with us?
I can jump in. I've had a lot of mentors. Some of them have been my advisors, but there's other ones in my department who are maybe even just a few years ahead of me. Andoni Lavery, who's a senior scientist in my department, has been a really great mentor to me. We've spent a lot of time meeting over coffee and talking about life as an engineer and life as a mom, and has really been a really key part to my success here at Hui.
I think mentorship can take different forms. I don't have like one specific mentor in mind, but sometimes it's coworkers. Like, I feel like I've been inspired by Laurel at times in my career, working alongside her. Sometimes it's the people you work alongside with. Even just today, I was on the water with 2 other women engineers, and it was awesome. One's younger, one's older, and both of them I would consider, colleagues and mentors in different ways. You can take a lot from the people you work with, especially if they're, willing to teach and work with you.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking the same as Caitlin, that these mentors do take different forms, and sometimes, like I've had mentors like Don, mine and Caitlin's boss, who for years and years, who's kind of been a consistent presence, and then other people kind of come in for a little bit and go, and you can learn a lot from all the different people in your life. And also, especially like Caitlin said, coworkers, because like we've already talked about tonight, everyone approaches things from a different perspective and everyone has a different story. And I think being able to kind of weave those perspectives and stories in can be really interesting and just insightful for you.
I agree. I have several mentors and sort of for different areas of my professional career, and so some of them, they're not engineers, but they can help me with other aspects of the profession. And the one who was mentoring me when I first got here to Woods Hole is Dr. Ambrose Gerald. And he was a tremendous mentor to me right up through his retirement, and we're still in contact. So he's been really instrumental in some really challenging parts of my career here. But I think it's important to not just have one mentor.
I don't think that the importance of mentors, however you find them and however they come into your life, can't be overstated in terms of helping you navigate through all the questions that you have as you're going through school and then your career. I do have a question from 10-year-old Maeve, who wants to know, what is your favorite part about being an engineer? And I am going to limit you. You're going to have to narrow it down to, she asked, just your favorite part. So just one thing in all the things that you enjoy. If you had to say just what is your favorite part, what would that be?
I think the vast creativity and kind of the open-endedness of solving a problem.
Gwyneth, you looked like you had an answer.
Yeah, for me, it's the pattern recognition. When I'm gathering all those requirements and then I see the pattern, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, I like the creativity and the teamwork aspects of it.
For me, it's making things work. There's nothing more satisfying that we're trying to do something and it actually works.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It helps when it works. Even if you're creative and it doesn't work, then at the end of the day, you can get anything done.
It's even better when it works after it doesn't work a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Satisfaction at a job well done is really impactful. So we also have a lot of questions actually coming up for young people. Some are asking about, children even as young as 2 or 3. What do you think we can do to help encourage our young children as parents or teachers or mentors to learn from failure and to not shy away from challenges?
I'm dealing with that currently at home. I have a 3-year-old who my husband is attempting to put to bed right now while I do this. And hopefully that's going okay. But yeah, she'll build with blocks and she'll build, 8, 10 blocks high, and it's way over her head and it comes crashing down and she gets so upset. And so just telling her, it's okay, rebuild it. It's no problem. Next time it'll be 1 higher. Just that things break and you can keep trying, and maybe it needs a wider base so that it's stronger at the bottom. And then you kind of accidentally slip in some physics and math and science.
With pretzels.
The pretzels, yeah, it's pretzel sticks.
And I do think part of it is, even to use the word sort of failure. I learned a lot from my children. I have 3 children, and, when they're little, and I'm talking very little, and they're learning to walk, they walk a little bit and they fall down. They don't in their head say, I'm a failure, or I failed at this, or, there's nothing other than that. I'm going to do it this time and stand up and try it again. And so I think some of it is really just making sure that we're, a failure has such a negative connotation. And really all it is it's a path that you've explored that didn't lead to the outcome that you wanted. And there are other paths that you can explore, right? And I think we lose that a little bit. As we get older, we sort of start to say, oh, I didn't do that right the first time. And so that's kind of a negative thing. Whereas, little children do, until we start sort of bringing that in. And I think maybe we can just encourage each other, and the children that we have in our lives, and have them see it as it wasn't a failure. It was a step towards learning how to do it.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Carol Ann. I'm going to use that at home now.
Oh, well, unfortunately, we're getting close to our time for tonight, and there were a lot of questions that we were not able to get to. And I'm going to wrap a few of them that have come through about saying, you know, how do I become to get to work with underwater autonomous robots and all the cool tools and toys that you all work with. I'll just kind of make that a sort of a broad question for each of you. And I'm curious from each of you, do you have any special advice to young people, maybe girls and young women in particular, who think they might want to become an engineer and do something like what you're doing? So I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Anna.
So I'm going to encourage the young people to read a lot and ask a lot of questions, and also get involved with things that you like. There's many resources available at libraries and even online to learn more about engineering. There's also a lot of math in engineering. And I know we heard that Laurel worked extra hard to get through her math. And so I'm going to share that message that you don't want to shy away from learning math, even if it requires harder work.
Nope.
I can go next. I would say definitely protect your curiosity. Not all of this world is kind to curiosity, and there will be a lot of times that the world sort of tries to damp down your curiosity, but protect it. It's precious, and find places where you're supported to really explore your interests, ask your questions, and be able to try things that might not work the first time.
And I would say, I would add to that, seek out challenges, things that might be kind of scary or hard for you, and also to embrace new experiences, learning how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and how to accept, whatever the reality is in front of you, are really important skills. And the more you challenge yourself and the more kind of unfamiliar situations you put yourself in, I think the broader your perspective is, and the more you learn about yourself and the world around you.
Yeah, and accepting challenges, exposing yourself to what challenges are out there. So, there's great resources at museums. Going to the Science Museum is a great place to explore all sorts of engineering and science that's out there, whether it's the civil engineering or the mechanical or software, and participating in science fairs and just getting yourself exposed, which often makes you uncomfortable, but exposing yourself to all of that.
Well, I would just add one. Go ahead. I was just going to add one more thing that, we're talking about engineering, and you might have specific goals, but there's a lot of different ways to reach your goals. So all of these things that we've talked about can kind of help you figure out what you might be really interested in and what you're really passionate about. And figuring that out sounds simple, but it's not always straightforward. But if you can do that, and if you can follow your heart and, find work that you really love, then you'll do a better job and have more fun than if you're slogging through something that you aren't as interested in. Yeah,
to ride on that, I would definitely say be willing to pivot. I mean, I'm in my third career. It's not always a straight line.
I like that. I think we have time for, one more thing to explore. And I thought this was just such a great question that came in. What advice would you give to your much younger self, say 10, 11, 12? What would you say if you could go back and say something to yourself? This is not an easy question, is it?
Be nicer to yourself.
I was like, how do you say that?
I don't know.
Just like that.
Yeah, be nicer to yourself. I would also tell myself, not to worry so much about the future and the path that I'm going to take, like to just enjoy and appreciate the path that I'm on and do my best job there. And, if you do that and don't worry about necessarily what the next step is all the time, then you're going to do a really good job and you're going to make it to the next step.
Yeah, kind of building on that, that it's not always about the grade you get, and it's more about what you learn from the class. definitely focused a little much on the grade.
I think we also think about life as being this straight path. And I think if you look at all of our careers, there's been turns and things that we didn't expect. And we've taken different paths throughout life that maybe we had aimed to get somewhere and we thought it was gonna be a straight path to get there, but we all took different paths to get where we are. And so thinking that there's only one path in life, I think is something that we probably all thought at one point, but it's not actually true.
And to give dates, I was that age in the late 70s, early 80s, and this is pre-internet. And so if I were really talking to my 10 or 11-year-old self, I would say you're not alone, because it was really hard at that point to just see one or two women signed. Jane Goodall showed up in the mail in the National Geographic or something, but I couldn't just look somebody up. And so finding your people to talk about, we're talking about mentorship and we're talking about fostering your curiosity. Find your people so that you can recognize that you're not alone in this.
I think that's really good advice, and it's not always easy to do. But
here with the internet.
Easier now, definitely easier now. So unfortunately, that's really all we have time for tonight. And we've had a lot of questions about, careers and how to get into these types of careers. So we do have a couple of resources for you if you are interested in a career in ocean science and engineering. So if you're interested in getting a degree in ocean science and engineering, you should check out the MIT WHOI Joint Program, which is an internationally recognized marine science and engineering graduate program. The deadline for applications is December 15th. You can also check out career opportunities at WHOI by visiting careers.whoi.edu. If you're interested in what the requirements are for becoming an astronaut, you can see the link in the chat, which will be coming up in a moment. And again, I do want to say a very big thank you to Anna Michelle, Gwyneth Packard, Caitlin Tradd, and Laurel O'Hara for participating in this very fascinating conversation about ocean and space exploration. Thank you also to all of my WHOI colleagues who've been working very hard behind the scenes to make this event possible. And to everyone who joined us, wherever you are, whatever stage in life you are at, I hope this has inspired you to go on and follow your dreams. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Out where the seas are the deepest and the mysteries the greatest lies our future. The ocean is our last unexplored, ungoverned frontier, the life support system for our planet, inextricably linked to our climate and weather and to the lives and livelihoods of countless people around the globe. But even against the ocean's vastness, humankind can be a formidable force. What happens next demands action that is rooted in scientific understanding and unvarnished truth, because our world stands at a fork in the road. In one direction, we watch the ocean being catastrophically altered beyond its ability to sustain us. In the other, understanding outraces exploitation, and we help steward and protect this most precious shared resource. What will be the legacy of the 21st century? Here and now, the world's most impressive collection of minds passionately dedicated to ocean science, engineering, education, and policy has a role to play. With the expertise to know what works and a trusted voice to present the facts as we uncover them, we can shape the future. We can inform governments, businesses, and conservationists. We can be the catalyst for change and unleash new knowledge in service of society. It is more than our responsibility. It is the defining moment of our generation. We are Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and this is our time.